Hello everyone, welcome to the presentation from Paul. Paul is the Chief Operating Officer at TraceLink and responsible for the global commercial product lines, customer success and corporate development. So Paul is very passionate about developing shared strategies with the customers that can enable the customers to utilize TraceLink, no or low-code digital networks, platform technology to solve supply chain challenges in areas such as traceability, sustainability, transparency, and supply and demand disruptions. So before joining TraceLink, Paul was a vice president at Firstmark Capital, a leading venture capital firm based in New York City. So the topic of the presentation is a very interesting one, Industry 4.0 strategies. Digital supply networks are the cornerstone of the supply chain resilience. So, Paul, very happy to transfer to you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I trust that you can hear me okay.
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Well, I certainly appreciate that introduction, and I appreciate the conference organizers inviting me and the TraceLink team to participate in this event. It's a great one. Based on the schedule and the companies and the participants that are here, it's certainly very exciting for TraceLink to be here. So, as Antonio mentioned, I'm here to talk a little bit about TraceLink's point of view on supply chain resilience, some of the work that we've been doing, and certainly happy to answer any questions after I share some of the material that we prepared for today. So I'll go ahead and get started. I can't see anybody out there, but I trust everyone is virtually there. And again, I look forward to any questions at the end of the presentation and the panel following this discussion. So, as Antonio pointed out, the topic that I wanted to cover and talk a little bit about is how we're using the Industry 4.0 framework and really talking to our customers and the people in our ecosystem about how to develop these strategies around using digital networks to attain goals like supply chain resilience. So I thought, certainly the focus of this conference was incredibly important and incredibly timely relative to some of the challenges that we're dealing with. So in case individuals aren't familiar with TraceLink, a quick introduction. So the company was founded in 2009. I've been with the team since 2015, so a little over 7 years now. And we have about 780, close to 800 employees over the last couple of months. We continue to grow very rapidly. We work with customers and partners all over the world. I think the last count was customers in 51 or 52 countries and partners of those customers in more than 100 countries throughout the world. So we serve those customers through 6 offices globally. And, the visual representation here is just a quick snapshot of many of the great customers that we have the great fortune of partnering with every day. So we work with folks throughout the supply chain, ranging from upstream on the direct material suppliers and people who manufacture ingredients and excipients. We manage and work with CMOs and CPOs on the contract side. We certainly spend a lot of time with the brand manufacturer community, as well as their partners downstream in distribution, 3PL, logistics, et cetera. And then we really follow those products and work with customers and their partners all the way down in the healthcare and retail space as well. So we really think about the product lifecycle holistically, and our work involves engaging with participants across the whole spectrum. So I think over the last 11, 12 years that the company has been around, it's created a really interesting vantage point for us to form a point of view on some of the challenges and potential ways to attack those challenges and ultimately overcome them. So that's TraceLink in a nutshell. In terms of the session agenda today, just a handful of items that I wanted to cover over the next 35 or 40 minutes, and really kind of 4 or 5 main ideas here. So I'd like to cover what is the opportunity and what does it mean to build digital networks? What does it mean to have a platform approach to building those networks with partners, and partners is the key word in that point. As a use case example, we'll talk a little bit about how the pharmaceutical track and trace regulations that have been rolled out in the United States, in the European Union, in China, and that continues in Brazil, upcoming requirements in Indonesia, many other countries throughout the world that are adopting similar regulations, but with some stark differences in terms of the models that they pursue. How that's really created this proving ground for how to deploy an Industry 4.0 strategy and ultimately a solution as not only a customer within the overall supply chain, but certainly as an ecosystem member or a node in that overall network. So we'll walk through our experience within pharmaceutical track and trace, and really how we believe that's informed our ability to help attack many other challenges that we see today. And then we'll finish up by talking about some actionable solution use cases for how to leverage those digital networks in order to build supply chain resilience, and talk a little bit about some of the things that TraceLink is doing in partnership with our customers today. And then obviously happy to open it up to questions if there are any to work through. So as a backdrop, it's important, I think, to start with a challenge. And this is an articulation of many things that we've heard from our clients over the last couple of years, and it's informed a lot of our investments. So, ultimately the punchline here is that when we're talking about supply chain challenges, very rarely are they strictly in an enterprise context. The challenges that are often the most difficult to overcome really involve the entire supply network. It involves your upstream partners. It involves your downstream partners. It involves direct partners. It involves indirect partners. And as supply chain leaders, it's very difficult to overcome some of these multi-enterprise challenges. So TraceLink has been working for 10 plus years in traceability. So really attacking problems around product counterfeiting, diversion, supply and demand disruption, and being able to tease out signal when quality events or other issues or challenges upstream affect the ability to deliver for patients and consumers downstream. Increasingly over the last couple of years, our customers have brought a number of other challenges to our doorstep as well. And some of these are obviously listed on the screen here. So, challenges around reporting and regulations and compliance, and really just good business decisions and investments around topics like transparency and sustainability programs, being able to understand, the carbon footprint of my business, as well as, the supply chain that I interact with, and my suppliers and my consumers, and how does that ultimately impact sustainability and some of those goals. Things around social responsibility. How do my partners, pay the providers that they work with, the suppliers that they work with as well. Increasingly, we find that either through governmental requirements or through requirements that the investment community and the capital markets have made for companies, people are paying attention to these topics more now than ever before. The common link between all of these problems is that you can't get there on your own. You're really at the mercy or at the whim of the participation of your partners, and often the participation of your partners hinges on the ability to communicate and collaborate with those partners. So we'll talk about a couple of these problems in the upcoming slides, but if you're going to attack any of these challenges, it's really on the back of networks that's going to allow you to overcome them. So, a really interesting framework, that people have put together is this idea of Industry 4.0. And I'm sure, most, if not everybody in the audience today is familiar with this idea of Industry 4.0, but it's worth just quickly highlighting how we got here. So, I think if we look at the way that technology has influenced business and ultimately supply chains over the last couple hundred years, we've made rapid progress, and in the last 10 or 15 years have obviously created the advent of what they now call Industry 4.0. But it really is each of these kind of industrial revolutions have been impacted by the introduction or the invention of key sets of technology, whether that's steam power, water power in the 17 and 1800s, the assembly line and advances in transportation and electrical power in the late 1800s into the 1900s, or more recently the advent of computerization and telecommunications, robotics. That are still in their infancy in many ways, but have been around for 30 or 40 years. What we see today is the opportunity to capitalize on all of those investments that have been made and really introduce a set of new technologies that are all about multi-enterprise connections and consumption of information and shared processes. And so if you think about Industry 3.0 as largely benefits or gains that have made in an enterprise context, we believe here at TraceLink the next 30, 40, 50 years plus are going to be around how do you take advantage of the multi-enterprise digitalization of a shared network outside of your own enterprise. And that's really the space that TraceLink works in. So we believe that there's an opportunity to certainly leverage advances in things like IoT, or the Internet of Things, which is essentially the mass production of sensors that can connect to the internet and can communicate information back, whether that's on the manufacturer of the shop line, or whether that's in your car, or whether that's in your home. The advent of all of this data, is incredible in terms of how it's tended to grow. But how you harness that data, how you connect it together, how you rationalize it, and how you share it with partners to make better business decisions and ultimately supply chain decisions in this context is really the opportunity that's ahead of us right now. So if we think about Industry 4.0, one of the key tenets is this idea of breaking down data silos. And, this is just kind of a visual representation of how to think about that, and really the journey that we believe that we're on as an industry, or as a set of industries across many, many supply chains. So as you move from left to right, the way to think about this is certainly around that journey I described, moving from Industry 3.0 to Industry 4.0. So tremendous advances in enterprise systems, but those enterprise systems create data silos, and typically very difficult to have information flow outside of those silos. So really the goal of Industry 4.0 is to break those silos down and really sit on top of them in many ways and be able to connect them together in an interoperable fashion. So what we're trying to do is really break those down, create digital links between those silos of information, and then ultimately allow stakeholders to make better decisions as that information flows. And so that information is going to flow upstream, downstream, in multiple directions. It's going to be distributed among many stakeholders. And obviously, when we're talking about supply chain and business data, some important considerations around data security, data transparency, administration rights, controls, all of those things that need to be thought through. And ultimately, that's the opportunity to introduce platform technology to create and manage and administer these digital networks that become this connective tissue between your enterprise systems, your people, your processes, to be able to connect all of those stakeholders together. Ultimately, if that can be accomplished, we can abstract away those silos of information, and we can securely allow that data to flow to where it needs to go to make those better decisions. Now, I've been kind of talking about this in the abstract, and it's important to put those into actionable contexts, and so that's what I'll strive to do in the next couple of slides. Ultimately, what our goal here is at TraceLink is to connect people, processes, systems, and information. And to do that, you have to take the entire end-to-end value chain or supply chain in mind. So, ultimately, step one is about creating digital networks and digitalizing the processes between all of the different stakeholders that you see. And so we've been doing that in a track and trace context, which we'll talk more about. But ultimately, it's how do you identify all of these nodes, create these networks to link them together? How do you digitalize and share processes through digital applications across this network so that the smallest node, the largest node, all the nodes in between them of different technological capacities have the ability to participate and share information. It's often the weakest link or, a very small node in the network that can bring the entire, supply chain down or minimally slow it down to a significant degree. If you can create those shared processes across that network, you have an opportunity to drive better cross-functional and cross-company execution. And so you can think about these shared work processes and really enabling those people to make better decisions. Those better decisions are going to be fueled by a common master network master data set or a common data model, right? So a lot of times, and I'm sure many of the leaders on this call have experienced this, whether we're talking about challenges for company master data, locations, sites, product master data that's represented, in one way in one system and another way in another system. That becomes a big challenge to be able to drive a common data set. And finding interoperability and a common way to express that data becomes critically important. But if you can do that, then you have that master data model for the network. And ultimately, that's what's required, all of these steps to drive what we call collective intelligence, which is a permissioned, either anonymized or non-anonymized data set, depending on the particular context or solution use case from across the network. So how do we apply a very specific set of data collected from all of the nodes in your supply chain for you to make a better decision as a supply chain leader? And so again, we'll cover some examples of that coming up. Ultimately, to accomplish that goal that surrounded that brain, those shared processes and shared applications and a common master data model framework, you have to have a platform strategy ultimately to do that. So in the background over the last 3 years, that's what TraceLink's been building. We've been building what we call the Opus platform, which in essence is a toolkit for building digital networks at scale. We learned how to do that through the track and trace experience, and I'll cite that as an example in the next slide. But when we think about what we're trying to accomplish as leaders from an Industry 4.0 perspective, we have to look at the benefits that we're trying to achieve, as well as the platform capabilities that are necessary to get there. So this is a pretty straightforward articulation of that, but I'm going to build up each of these layers here and talk a little bit about, in concrete terms, what a supply chain or a technology leader who's supporting a supply chain may need to do to be able to enable this kind of Industry 4.0 future that I'm talking about. So the first step is really at this network layer, right? And this network layer is critically important. It's really all about what is the mechanism that you use to create and manage those networks. And the benefit that you're trying to achieve here is ultimately a single source of truth for that master data set that I was describing before. So it doesn't help if products are represented in multiple ways, companies are represented in multiple ways across a network context. So step one is really around a capability to onboard in a very clean fashion partners, upstream, downstream, customers, direct, indirect, so that you have a clear articulation of your supply chain network, right? Not only your internal company master data, but your external company master data as well. And so with that onboarding comes management, it becomes administration, it comes routing, and the requirement is to be able to, at scale, authenticate those users, manage those users, and administer them based on the roles and rights that they may have. Okay, so first is building those networks. The second is, on top of those networks that we put together, how do we create integration points so that information can flow in an interoperable fashion? And so what we've done here is we've used the track and trace experience where people have to report information in different ways, but we've abstracted away that complexity with a model that we call integrate once, interoperate across. And I'll set aside some of the more technical requirements here, but the basic idea is, in order to get anyone and everyone in terms of the nodes of the network to participate, you have to let them participate in the way that they're technologically capable of doing. So that could be through APIs, that could be through plugins, that could be through a user interface, it could be through a B2B information exchange. Ultimately, letting people plug into a network and share information in the way that works for them, but having that platform in essence, translate that information and then route it back out to partners in a way that that partner understands, becomes a Rosetta Stone of sorts, where that translation engine is constantly modifying that data set, keeping it clean, but ultimately making it something that someone can understand on the other side. So that integration and interoperability becomes critically important. Once you establish the network and you have those points of interoperable integration, you start to be able to drive an information set, and ultimately resulting in a set of predictive analytics, because you have a master data model or a metadata model for all the business objects across the network, right? So it's an articulation of the information from your company and all the other companies that you do business with, and that you have the ability to gain access to that information, permissioned, of course, from the partners that you work with, and then being able to use that in the context of integrated, we call them data mesh pipelines, but basically technology that allows you to use that data to create predictive analytics within the platform itself. So it speeds your time to market to be able to use that information in an actionable way. That information is ultimately created through what we call low-code multi-enterprise applications. So these apps are what you deploy to be able to connect processes across companies. So it could be for a supply chain planning use case. It could be for a track and trace use case. It could be for an ESG use case. But deploying an application links companies together and allows them to start sharing information, again, in an interoperable fashion. That's what allows the networks actually to be created in terms of those shared business processes. In this last layer, the solution layer, is critically important because no two companies operate exactly the same process. So ultimately, what you have to be able to do in order to execute on this kind of shared supply chain wide vision is to allow companies to have the experiences that their users need to be able to execute those processes. But you have to maintain network interoperability while doing that. So those are two things that are often very, very difficult to make work together, those company-specific customizations of processes, whether that's the experience or that's a workflow, that's a new role or a permission. Being able to allow companies that flexibility, but keeping them interoperable with those shared solutions and applications is really where the magic is made. So TraceLink's been hard at work building this out in the background to really allow supply chain leaders and other business leaders to execute on challenges that are important to them. So to make that come to life a little bit, it's helpful to profile an actual use case. And so we'll look at pharmaceutical track and trace, which we believe really should be viewed as the global industry 4.0 success story. So there are lots of examples of industry 4.0 in pockets of particular industries. People have made advancements in automotive and aerospace and some other areas, but those networks tend to be much smaller, and there tend to be larger players that can exert influence on a smaller number of vendors or suppliers. In the pharmaceutical industry, as you all know, there are literally hundreds of thousands of participants, be those downstream customers in the healthcare and retail side, hundreds or thousands of distributors, many, many thousands of manufacturers, and many thousands of suppliers all around the world. So being able to navigate this at scale is something that we've been able to accomplish in partnership with many of the companies that are on this phone call today, and many of the companies that I showed on one of the earlier slides. So ultimately, what we've done is productize the experience that we gain from track and trace. And so when we look at track and trace and the challenge that we had to overcome together, we'll look at those same layers. So at the network layer, the challenge that we had to overcome was, the identification, authentication, onboarding, and continued management, even today, of hundreds of thousands of accounts or companies that have a unique role to play. And what we've been able to accomplish over the last 10 years together has been the onboarding of more than 285,000 network members, each that have been uniquely identified and authenticated into the network, and that are available to connect with, for a variety of other use cases today. So that's been a long journey, but we've made a lot of progress together. On the integration front, the track and trace challenge we had to overcome was really around overcoming the need to create one-off integrations with either supply chain partners. In the case of track and trace, these line management systems, warehouse management systems, many instantiations of ERP systems as well. And on the previous slide, I described the interoperability, or the integrate once, interoperate across model. And really that model has allowed us to scale together over the last really 4 to 5 years up to nearly 14,000 connections with serialization, more than 7,000 live CMO connections, many APIs for system integration, and ultimately industry savings in the billions of dollars, because we've eliminated the need for these point-to-point integrations. So for any given participant in this track and trace ecosystem, they get to integrate a single time for a given transaction, and they're able to share that information with their partners across the entire network. So it becomes incredibly efficient. From the information layer perspective, it's been really about maintaining and creating metadata for business objects for serialization and compliance, right? And so to date, we serialize nearly 1 billion new products every month. We've done over 30 billion over the last 5 or 6 years. And so this becomes an incredibly valuable and important data set that as an industry we can collectively work with, right? Again, recognizing the need for anonymity and protecting that data is the top concern always. But if you imagine the opportunities once you understand, with a clean data set of so many hundreds of thousands or millions of products flowing through the system every week or month, you start to be able to execute on really interesting challenges, such as drug shortages, right? So we've started to apply machine learning technology to this anonymized information to be able to predict in advance of current methods up to 90 days before a shortage has actually occurred. So this is very new. We've been working on this for the last year since working with an industry consortium of leaders post the pandemic to try and really stem the tide of this problem. But it just illustrates a really interesting way that information can be used. At the application layer for track and trace, we had a big challenge to overcome in terms of connecting these parties together. So far, there's been more than 10 countries that have established these regulatory requirements. And generally, these regulatory requirements, mandate that companies either connect to governmental systems or they connect to all of the partners that they do business with. And so we've done that very successfully in partnership with our customers, and now exchange, tens of millions of regulatory documents every year. And we do that for, north of 40,000 different G10s or unique products in the ecosystem today. But all of that is done through these shared applications. In terms of solutions, this is again that opportunity to drive a common experience, but flexible for each member's needs to be able to run a unique process on their own end. So to date, across those serialization and compliance solutions, we do that through about 1,300 plus customer experiences connected to those 285,000 partners. So it's a really powerful opportunity to engage, but keep a unique experience for each of those customers. So once you have that background of the platform technology and what you can do, you have to think about the challenges that you can then apply that to, and what are timely in terms of what's happening in the ecosystem today. So there's 3 main areas that TraceLink focuses its time, energy, and efforts right now. So serialization and traceability and regulatory compliance are areas that I've described already. This third area listed first is around supply chain work management. It's around really how do we enable team members across different supply chain nodes to be able to work together and collaborate more effectively? How do we give executives the visibility they need into issues, challenges, tasks, recalls, those types of business problems to be able to empower their teams to make better decisions and then ultimately drive continuous improvement and business outcomes? So we'll talk a little bit about that here briefly in the last 15 minutes that we have, because I think it's a really interesting use case to talk about all the supply chain dislocation that we're having today and really the resilience that we need to build up. So in terms of this use case, imagine, the leaders here, obviously many supply chain executives and leaders on the call, The problem that we're talking about is really issues and exceptions, both internal and external. And the process that we've applied that to is really supply chain planning. So how do those planning teams get the information that they need to be able to execute a business process? So let me set the backdrop. So we were approached by a customer a couple of years ago. We started collaborating with them. And this is the problem they articulated. They articulated a problem where I have hundreds or thousands of direct and indirect supply chain partners that I need knowledge of. But generally today, I find out about issues and exceptions very, very late in the planning process and in the execution process. And when I say issues or exceptions, what I mean are things like material shortages or deviations in quality. It could be a demand increase. It could be a late shipment or something stuck on a ship in the Suez Canal, for example. But this company approached us and said, we just don't have good visibility. And as a result of that lack of visibility, our teams ranging from purchasing, production, logistics, sales and marketing, finance, they're really challenged to make better decisions. And ultimately, we're trying to execute both a plan and the full supply chain execution process, but we're really prevented from doing that for lack of this information. So what happens is these issues that are sourced either from internal sites or external suppliers, ultimately get escalated, right? We've all been there where we're fighting fires, today and tomorrow and into next week, or in sometimes longer time periods, but we're making trade-offs and we're escalating those exceptions up, and we're trying to get decisions made, and those are getting pushed down. Ultimately, the problem that we started working on was how do we digitalize what is today a very, very manual process? So in terms of, phone, fax, email, virtual meetings, in-person meetings to really firefight these on a daily, weekly basis, it's really causing a big challenge for people to work more collaboratively together. And ultimately, that inability to collaborate results in business KPIs suffering. So whether I'm holding more inventory or I'm paying more for inputs from a COGS perspective, whether my on-time and full rates are declining because I can't deliver for customers, whether my quality and right first time is taking a hit. Ultimately, these all tie to the ability to drive revenue at the levels that the S&OP plan would have established. So this is the problem that can be digitalized and digital networks can be applied to. So if I go back to the model here, we're really operating in this space between companies and partners, and ultimately each company is using different systems, whether it's ERP, MRP, quality teams using QMS. Your suppliers have their own CRM systems, but there's a space that's not occupied by anything in the middle. And ultimately, we want to apply the same roadmap that we described on the platform context to this. So we want to be able to build digital networks. We want to establish standardized workflow-driven process collaboration. We want to leverage best-in-class third-party solutions, whether those are plugins, whether those are integrations, whether those are third-party apps. And we ultimately want to allow each customer or each participant in the solution be able to design that and customize it to their own needs for their own process requirements. And so we apply that same model, and we created a new product called Supply Chain Work Management. And ultimately, this product is around empowering people to fill those operational gaps created in the silos of teams and systems. And so we really started with just attacking issues and very basic issue management and starting to introduce tasks into that as well. But this visual is really meant to represent that space between those teams, whether internal or multi-company. And ultimately, the value props here are very straightforward and clear. It's about providing executive visibility so the decisions can be made and trade-offs can be managed in terms of making the best decisions to affect on-time and full delivery, being able to establish those networks and really take advantage of teams like TraceLinks or other companies that offer capabilities to be able to create these digital networks and onboard those networks, maintain them, manage them, authenticate those partners, create those opportunities for collaboration through digital workspaces. Give those teams the tools through pre-built solution processes to be able to manage those issues that I described. leverage integrations to be able to connect to other enterprise systems, and then ultimately customize that experience for your company's needs. So that's a lot to pack into a single solution. But we've done that and started to roll that out in partnership with a couple of early collaborating customers. And ultimately what we found is that when we can apply this model of onboarding those customers, those suppliers, those partners, those distributors, creating that framework that you have a digitalization of your supply network, you can start to do some really interesting things. So you ask all of those employees across, your customers for complaints or issues, contract manufacturers who can't deliver on time. Maybe they have a shortage of materials that you need to know about, but asking them to really log that in a common place, and in a shared solution for you as a company, where you can centralize all of that information, gives your cross-functional teams the opportunity to manage those issues that create those exceptions in the planning process. So you can start to make decisions about, hey, if that late PO comes in, or that particular order is outside of our lead time, what trade-offs are we going to make? Which customers are we going to disappoint? What additional manufacturing lines can we turn on in the short term to be able to satisfy that demand? Ultimately, those decisions roll up to supply chain leaders and other business leaders to be able to manage those trade-offs, monitor those threats, and really enable their teams beneath them to be able to collaborate and make better decisions. Ultimately, that leads to significant improvement based on what we've seen. And so all of this is done in the context of the existing investments that many of our customers have already made. So when we talk to people that are using planning engines or have one or more ERP installations, they're using different types of quality management systems, they're using cold chain and other IoT sensors, all of those really become valuable points to unite in this kind of shared mesh, or this shared set of digital networks connecting people, processes, systems, and information. And each of those has the opportunity to source and ultimately standardize a way to collect all this information. So if my planners suddenly get a signal of an increase in demand, if my provider of real-time transportation visibility notifies me of a late shipment, the opportunity to really centralize all of this information, integrate it together, and then start to do really interesting things. Very, very basic examples like being able to auto-populate exceptions via API, centralize issues, and get them into that common dashboard so that those leaders have that visibility to make those decisions. So when we think about Industry 4.0, the opportunities are around stitching all this together, filling those digitalization gaps, and bringing all this information to the right people at the right time and right place to be able to make these decisions. So we've seen this be a really powerful way in. So when we talk about the goal of this conference in terms of supply chain resiliency, that's our collective goal, of course. We want to deliver on time and full to the patients that we serve for the critical products that many of you manufacture. So that's our ultimate goal. If we can do that, we can obviously improve a lot of other KPIs, as well, that are going to hit the bottom line of the business. But to do that, we can take very, very simple steps, right? So this idea around supply chain work management and managing issues as a first step really can be followed in a handful of simple steps. So step one is really around capturing those issues in a common way. Step two is around finding a mechanism to be able to resolve them quickly, measure them, get them routed to the right people, allow those people to collaborate in a shared experience, and then start to bubble up those issues to the executives and leaders who need to make very difficult decisions about what to prioritize and who to make accountable for carrying out the steps that have been described. And ultimately, step four is here around leveraging the data. So how do we create that common data set that's very clean and very normalized for what's happening in my supply chain ecosystem, so that as a leader, I can plug it into a Six Sigma program. I can be able to really drive continuous process improvement to be able to stop some of these issues from recurring. And for the issues ultimately that we can't prevent, how do we make our way through them as fast as we possibly can and manage the trade-offs between them? And that's really, from TraceLink's point of view, the opportunity to drive resilience, is to not create these big multi-year digitalization projects, but really get started very fast building these networks of teams using shared solutions to drive ultimately resiliency. And so the impact has been pretty substantial. Obviously the business benefits on the right are sometimes very difficult to quantify, admittedly. But what we've seen with our early customers using this very straightforward product is the ability to drive very quantifiable reductions in the number of open issues that they're dealing with in total, the time to be able to centralize and clear the deck or resolve those issues that they're collecting. And ultimately, by putting in place programs to understand why those issues are happening, the ability to manage those disruptions with their suppliers or with their contract manufacturers, packagers, et cetera, in a more effective way. Ultimately, what we want to drive to is kind of that on time and full improvement. But we get the benefits of enhanced inventory turns, greater customer satisfaction rates, better fill rates, and throughput as well. So, these are things that we're working to measure all the time with our partners. But certainly the data is very clear that just attacking simple things like issues and exceptions can create real impact for the supply chain in very quick time. So, to close here, I think I have 2 or 3 minutes left. I'll just reiterate some of the messages that hopefully I've been able to share. It's really around intercompany networks. What are the simple, straightforward strategies that you can deploy to start connecting people, processes, partners, and systems that you may already be using. It may be easier than you think to get started to build those digital networks. Once you do, you start to be able to leverage shared information through these solutions and really drive empowerment into the teams to make better decisions and ultimately impact the business in a positive way. By doing so, obviously teams continue to enhance, decentralized decision-making gets to increase over time. And it's a bit of a flywheel in terms of these effects compounding on themselves. So it's something we've started to see and are very excited about. Ultimately, if we can execute on that together, back to the example on the track and trace side, we've been able to really create that very unique data set together and create an opportunity to execute on collective intelligence, to solve problems like shortages. That same idea can be applied to work management as well, right? So how do you use that data to be able to inform, really those continuous improvement processes and programs with your partners so that you get the most out of your supply chain. So with that, I am done.